In the scope of world history, the Hebrew people get little attention because they played a small relative role. Their story begins with Abram, who traveled from Mesopotamia to Canaan. He became the patriarch of the Middle East. Abraham changed his name from Abram to Abraham when he made a covenant with God, which was passed down through his son Isaac, who continued the lineage of God's chosen people. Ishmael, Abraham's son by a servant, according to tradition, became the father of the Arab people. Isaac's son Jacob inherited the birthright and the covenant with God, which Isaac had received from Abraham. This birthright was passed down to Jacob's favorite son, Joseph. Joseph's brothers were jealous and sold him into slavery into Egypt. While in Egypt, Joseph interpreted a dream for Pharaoh of impending famine. Pharaoh gave Joseph charge of managing the storage of grain to prepare for this famine. Joseph's family came to Egypt for grain, and while they were there, they were reconciled with Joseph. And this timeline tied in with the Hyksos rule of Egypt. Many generations later, the Hebrews had grown so populous in Egypt that the pharaohs enslaved the men to work on large public projects. Moses, a Hebrew raised as an Egyptian prince, left Egypt. He returned years later to negotiate the release of the Hebrews with Pharaoh. As the Hebrews traveled in the wilderness from Egypt to Canaan, Moses received in addition to God's covenant with the chosen people, the Ten Commandments, which instructed Hebrews to only recognize one God, the Yahweh of Abraham's covenant. Eventually, the Hebrew people reached Canaan, their promised land. For a time, they were ruled by judges. Around 1095 BC, the people asked for a king. Samuel, the prophet, designated Saul to become king. Saul became disobedient and lost leadership, in part due to mental illness. Samuel then anointed a young man named David to become the next king. After years of civil war, David unified the kingdom and established a capital at Jerusalem. David's son Solomon built a fabulous temple in Jerusalem. After Solomon's reign, the 10 northern tribes broke away and formed the kingdom of Israel. Judah, to the south, was ruled as a separate kingdom. In 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered Israel in the north and deported its population. In 597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon conquered Judah, the southern kingdom. 10 years later, he destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem and sent the people to Babylon in exile. In 593 BC, Cyrus of Persia conquered the Babylonians and allowed the Hebrews to return to Jerusalem. Because of the term used by the Persians to describe the Hebrews, they came to be known as Jews. From this point forward, the Hebrews or Jews were dominated by other kingdoms in the Near East, except for brief independence in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. This dispersion of the Hebrew people from their promised land is called the diaspora. Their strength and resilience as a people comes from their identity as God's chosen people, an identity preserved through covenants. The commandments recorded in the Pentateuch or Torah capture the essence of this covenant, and obedience and devotion to Yahweh were key to Jewish identity in ancient times.